Hello, everyone. I'm Deacon Pedro, and welcome to this new edition of our continued series during this time of pandemic, Faith in a Time of Crisis. Today we travel to Nova Scotia, and I'm very pleased to be joined by the Most Reverend Anthony Mancini, Archbishop of Halifax-Yarmouth. Archbishop Mancini, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to join you.
First of all, I'd like to maybe express our deep sorrow. I think the whole country is with you during this time, and our prayers of consolation to you and to the people of Nova Scotia.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a very unusual and strange experience for all of us to go through. No one ever imagined that Nova Scotia would become a place where the largest mass killings of individuals would take place.
Right.
And certainly not in the small rural context in which it actually took place. It's been mind-boggling for all of us, to say the least.
Right. I think that you're right. I think that by now most of our viewers are very familiar that, as you said, the deadliest shooting in Canadian history took place in various locations, not too far away from where you are right now in your archdiocese. 23 deaths, including the 22 victims and the shooter. Can you tell us a little bit, Archbishop, what goes through your mind as you remember those events of 2 weeks ago?
Well, I mean, I first heard of what had happened on a Sunday afternoon, Sunday afternoon after I had finished celebrating Mass in this new online fashion. And so I was sitting at home quietly, and suddenly this comes upon me as news, and I thought, what the hell is going on here? That's literally my first reaction, because I just couldn't believe it. And then it was very confusing because people are being killed. Then suddenly there's questions about somebody who appears to be an RCMP officer, a car that looks like an RCMP, a police car. So it was really a very, very initially very strange thing. Hard to believe that there was any kind of reality to it, but it soon hit home that not only was this real, but this was a growing an unfolding story, because as the police then began to explain what was going on, even the first conferences were minimal. We didn't seem to be getting very clear information. So for the first while, it was very, very confusing and tremendously shocking, and with an impact of sadness on all of us, certainly on me.
Right. Yeah. And I think confusing as well. You mentioned that it was unexpected where it took place. What can you tell us about those communities where this event took place?
Well, it's in a rural part of Nova Scotia. It's kind of on your way towards going west in our archdiocese. It's somewhere geographically, it's between Truro and Amherst, to give a sense of geography. And it's an area which was originally populated by the Acadians, because it's, you go up the Bay of Fundy, and this was a spot where the French settlers initially settled. That's why it has a French name, Portapic.
Oh, wait, yes.
Okay.
Right.
And so that area was initially populated by the first French settlers and so forth. But then the nature of the community changed, because after 1750, when the British expelled the Acadians,
Hmm.
Many of those settlers were sent elsewhere, or they went elsewhere, and so the population changed, and so that area has been largely populated by people of Scottish background.
Hmm.
And it also explains why presently that area is mostly known to be at least of Protestant connection. So there's Anglicans, there's Baptists, there's Presbyterians, that sort of
Right.
thing.
Because I was going to ask you, I think a lot of us have this idea that Nova Scotia has very deep Catholic roots.
Well, I mean, it has Catholic roots in the sense that certainly the first settlers were Catholic because the ones who first arrived were from France.
Uh-huh.
But at the moment, um, while the Catholic Church is by itself, I suppose, the largest congregation or largest community of faith, uh, it is still not larger than the combined non-Catholic Protestant families that make up the rest of the population.
Right. I think we also have an idea, which I think is true, that Nova Scotians are very friendly. It's a community that values family and gatherings. With the current restrictions, with social isolation and all of that, it makes everything that's happening slightly more difficult.
Well, you're right. I mean, Nova Scotians have always been very, very welcoming and kind. I mean, they're noted for their kitchen parties,
Right.
and they're trying to do the best they can to try to sort of re represent a kitchen party by using, these resources that we are presently using even as we converse. So
Yeah.
there's lots of that expression. I mean, the last couple of days we've had vigils and we've had expressions from right across the country of people who have been supportive of what's been going on, of trying to find ways of helping, stronger together. That sort of theme has been very uh, very much on our minds in the last little while. So the population of Nova Scotia is very, very welcoming, and after all, they welcome an Italian Archbishop in Halifax, so that's not a bad thing, I
Not a
think.
bad thing. Yes, very friendly and very welcoming. Um, no one, I think, I mean, you're an archbishop, you're a religious leader. I'm a deacon. I mean, we don't look forward to moments of crisis, but in a way, this is our job. We look to be with the people. I think even before the tragedy of 2 weekends ago, Archbishop, you were probably thinking, how can I be with my people during this time of crisis? What kind of adjustments did you have to make, or did you have to come up with so that you could do your job?
Well, I mean, it's hard to do your job in a world that's been turned upside down. I
Yes.
mean, being an archbishop, uh, has there's a framework for that. There are parameters for that, which we've been working with for hundreds of years. Suddenly, the coronavirus has put us in a situation where none of us have ever experienced being in this kind of environment ever before.
Hmm.
And frankly, I'm very concerned about what this actually means for us as a church. I mean, everyone is anxious to get back to normal. I keep asking myself, what's normal? And what are we getting back to? In fact, I'm not sure if we can speak in terms of going back to whatever we were before all of this occurred. I think the impact of this worldwide crisis is that it's causing all of us to redefine ourselves as
Hmm.
Christians. It's causing us to redefine ourselves, frankly, as human beings.
Hmm.
And then as a church, what does it mean to be the church? I mean, how many of us were touched by watching the Holy Father give a blessing to the city of Rome and to the whole world in the dark in an empty St. Peter's Square.
Yes.
Now, I've been there a number of times. I've never seen St. Peter's Square empty.
Yes.
Well, what is that actually saying to us as a church right now? I'm very concerned about that. So part of what's happening to me as a bishop and to all of us, I think, as Christians and as Catholics, is that we're struggling with whatever the Holy Spirit may be trying to speak to us at this time. I think that as a bishop, thanks to this high-tech equipment that we have, is actually forcing me to rediscover the power of the Word.
Right.
Because that's all we've got right now. The power of the Word. Yes, I say Mass every morning, and it's live streamed from our office. I have a little chapel here in the office building. And this afternoon, as a matter of fact, we're going to be celebrating a funeral from that little chapel. Archbishop Guevara-Mann's sister died a few days ago, and he's going to be presiding a funeral online. I mean, this is very, very different. I mean, whoever thought of himself as a bishop? I never certainly did think of myself as a televangelist.
Right. No, and you would never would have thought that you would have had to make the decision to close churches, or to say that Mass could not be held. For people who are not in Nova Scotia, are those restrictions the same as other provinces in Canada in terms of the churches being closed?
Yes, they are. Our churches are closed, and we are restricted to gatherings no more than 5 people. So I've had questions, raised like, well, how are we supposed to do a funeral? Can we do a funeral? I said, well, you can. You can have a liturgy of the Word, and including whoever is the presider, whether priest or deacon. That's one person. Maybe you can bring together 3 others or 4 other people, and you can do an interment with, again, the social distancing required.
Right.
But that's very, very strange for Catholics and for Christians generally, because funerals are not for the dead. Funerals are for the living.
Yes. And
So,
I would think, I was going to say, I would think, especially in communities like the rural communities where the tragedy happened 2 weekends ago, their ability to gather, to grieve together, to comfort each other in person is so important. And I guess they're not able to do funerals. I don't know. I know there's been tributes and memorials, but it's not the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing. Someone wrote to me just the other day. It says virtual hugs don't do it.
That's true.
They just don't do it, because part of our human nature is that we are wired to be in contact. We are meant to be relational and to be in community and in communion. We can experience some of that virtually, but we can't experience it as it is intended to be. So that's why I wonder what it means for us all to be the church after the pandemic,
I know. And I sense, you've told us, but I get the sense that you're even struggling with that. So what do you tell people when they ask you what all this means or how we can best adjust?
Well, I tell them that we make use of what we've got. God has provided us with this amazing, miraculous means of communicating. So let's use it. Let's use it well. Let's be in touch. Let's stay in contact as best we can. I was talking with my family, with my sister, just a few days ago. She's in Montreal. I'm here. We're in touch and do all these things. And she made the comment and says, when are we ever going to be able to get together again? But while there's that physical, emotional, and psychological need to be together, we have at least the ability to be in touch and to see one another and to at least be able to check in and to see that we're still doing okay. That's what we can do, and that's what we need to do. We can pray together, even in this fashion. the power of prayer and the power of communication, I think, is absolutely amazing. We did Holy Week by live streaming from our cathedral. We were only 6 people, but we did Holy Week, and we managed it. I couldn't believe how many people followed us online. So one of our technicians told us that we literally had something like 30,000 people that followed this whole thing. I mean, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
We're finally able to compete with some of the media people.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's true. We're able to reach so many more people this way.
Yeah.
And maybe so many more people are searching or being forced to be searching for meaning. And we need to be able.
And I try to imagine how many of those 25, 30,000 people were people who wouldn't have even been near church.
Exactly.
So who knows how many are being touched by some of the things that are being said by our pastors when they're live streaming a mass on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Or what happens when suddenly the parish becomes missionary. We keep talking about becoming missionary disciples.
Yes.
And suddenly parishioners are calling on fellow parishioners. Maybe the person that you sat next to in the church for the last 10, 15 years, and you may never even have spoken to that person, but suddenly you remember that man or that woman, and you say, I wonder who it is. Let me check that out and find out. Someone told me last week that they received a phone call from a parishioner. And it says it was the most moving thing that had happened to her in days because it was unexpected. Mm-hmm. It was a reaching out experience. Yes, it was on the phone, but it was nevertheless real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the stuff that we're doing. You know?
Yeah, you're right. And I think it's a hallmark of Christians that we're always able to find what's new, what's good in the midst of the darkness. Are you able to tell us a little bit about the situation in general in Nova Scotia? Are there a lot of cases? How is the virus, how is the pandemic affecting the people in the province?
Yeah, we are experiencing Nova Scotia at the moment is probably it is the highest number of coronavirus victims in Atlantic Canada.
Wow.
We're the last number that I think I heard was over 800 people that have been touched but directly, you know. And we have a significant number of deaths. Unfortunately, one of the homes for the elderly that is quite a large home here in Halifax has become almost like the center where the highest number of deaths are elderly people who have been in this particular home. That's where the focus of attention has gone. But yeah, so compared to Prince Edward Island or compared to New Brunswick, we are the highest number.
Yeah.
Of victims.
Yeah. Right. Did you, when you made and I presume it was a difficult decision, but the decision to close the churches, to cancel masses, did you hear a lot of maybe pushback from parishioners or Catholics about complaints about not being able to receive the Eucharist or the Eucharist being considered an essential service?
I've had a bit of that, but frankly, nothing like the impression given from listening to certain news, reports from elsewhere. We had one case, for instance, an example where one of the evangelical churches got permission to celebrate in Nova Scotia what they called a drive-in, Sunday service.
Right.
And it was a disaster in the sense that it did not accomplish what they had hoped. It did not bring people together like they thought they would. And the doctor who is the health chief medical officer here in Nova Scotia, who had given permission for that event, came back and said it was a mistake. And so we are not allowing any more of this activity to go on. So I've not had the pushback that I've heard of in the United States, for instance, where, this is an infringement on religious liberty, or this is some form of essential service that needs to be provided. It is an essential service, and we are providing it with what we are about.
Right.
As a priest and as a bishop, my first responsibility is to preach the word of God. And I have a means for doing that, and our pastors have ways of doing that. And it's amazing how many people and parishioners are being reached through the medium that we have. It's not perfect, but we're not dead.
You're right. It's not a perfect situation. So I guess our response can't be perfect either.
Right.
What do you tell, I guess, using the means that you have, preaching the word, are you finding that you have to preach about hope, encouraging people? What are you telling Catholics in Nova Scotia in your archdiocese to exhort them to look for the positive?
Well, it has brought us back to essentials. I mean, we're actually being forced through these circumstances to actually preach the good news.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling someone a few days ago in another interview that the whole purpose for our existence, the reason why Christians exist, is because we have something to say to the reality of death. We exist because we have a message that confronts the reality of death by suggesting and by preaching and by actually saying with conviction that death is not the last word.
Mm-hmm.
That's the gospel. There is nothing else. Everything else is frills. Okay? That is it. When we celebrate a funeral, in the preface, we have a line which always moves me, and I think people who hear it and grasp it are also moved. And that line says, for people of faith, life is changed, not ended.
Right.
That's right in the preface for a funeral mass. Life is changed, not ended, which I think is a very hopeful message for someone who thinks that you are born, you live, you work, you suffer, you die, and that's all.
Mm-hmm.
There is more to it than that. That's the hope. That's
Mm-hmm.
the hope of the resurrection. And that's the central message of our faith. That's what we're putting out there.
Yeah, I know. It's a time for hope. It's a time also for faith. Like you said, there might be a lot of people who are not of faith or who've lost their faith that are maybe finding it now. What would you tell our viewers to encourage them as they proclaim the word to their family and friends who maybe are looking for meaning? How should we encourage each other?
Well, the first thing probably that I would say is that don't be afraid to share your conviction. I mean, if you do believe that there is life beyond death, then don't be afraid to say so. We would not have said something like that under ordinary or normal circumstances. How many people at work never say anything about what they believe or don't believe? I mean, even in the family, you're afraid, well, I don't want to infringe on somebody's beliefs. I don't want to impose. No. Here we're not imposing anything. We're sharing our convictions. Well, if you're convinced that there is more to life than death, if you believe and you hope that there is more to this than what we're experiencing right now, well, don't be afraid. That's the whole point of the first days after the resurrection, when we go to the Acts of the Apostles and we see what's happening to these guys who are stuck behind their closed doors and they're afraid.
Yes.
And suddenly Christ is there in the midst of them and he says, peace be with you. Don't be afraid. Get out there, do what you got to do, and share your faith.
Yes.
That turns you into an evangelist.
Yes.
Right? That's really, really key. And so I would say that to people, don't be afraid to share what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to impose it on anybody. You don't have to force anybody. You don't have to say you've got to do this or you've got to go to church or you've got to do this. No, I'm just saying to you what I think needs to be said. If you like it, receive it.
Right.
Jesus said, if the people there receive your peace, fair enough. If your peace doesn't get welcomed well, move on. Move on. We haven't got time to waste on meaningless arguments.
Right.
Oh, there it is. I think people who are struggling are more disposed to receiving such an encouraging word. I was saying to someone the other day, I said, what we're experiencing right now is probably for baby boomers and younger people comparable to what took place in World War II. And there was a saying during the war which said that there are no atheists in foxholes. You've heard that expression probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, now sitting in our homes by ourselves, we're not in foxholes, but we are in isolation. And what happens when you're by yourself? You start to think, you start to wonder, you start to ask yourself questions. And suddenly your own mortality perhaps kicks in. And you start asking those really serious questions that you might not have otherwise have ever asked. I mean, is that all there is? Is there more to this?
Yeah.
And suddenly, maybe the reality of God who is love, becomes something that actually can touch someone's heart.
Yes. Wise words. Archbishop Anthony Mancini, thank you so much for those words of inspiration. If I can remember or remind, if our viewers can remember anything, that death is not the final word. That's the gospel message. And it's time to remember that. It's not ironic that this is happening during the Easter season. So it's a very important message for us. Thank you for your words of wisdom. And again, our deepest sorrow and prayers of consolation to you and to the people of Nova Scotia during this time.
Thank you very much, Pedro. I wish you well with Salt and Light and all the good work you're doing, and carry on and keep preaching the Word of God.
Through any means possible, Archbishop Anthony Mancini, he's the Archbishop of Halifax-Yarmouth, and he spoke to us from his office in Halifax. That's all for today. Thank you for being with us. Remember to continue visiting our website, saltandlighttv.org, for more articles and videos during this time of pandemic. But most importantly, continue to find faith during this time of crisis.